Good day. My name is Brenda McClurkin. I'm in Special Collections here on UTA Libraries, and on behalf of the UTA Libraries and our co-sponsor, the Center for Great Southwestern Studies in the History of Cartography, I welcome you to Eyewitnesses to Tragedy, JFK 50 years later. This panel discussion was inspired by the exhibit that Special Collections has created called Howdy Mr. President, a Fort Worth Perspective on JFK. The core of that the exhibit are about 80 photographs from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram coverage of President and Mrs. Kennedy's visit to North Texas, primarily Fort Worth, and then in Dallas on November 21st and 22nd. We would invite you to come and go through the exhibit while after our panel discussion, and would welcome you doing so. I'd like to extend our thanks to Dr. Sam Haynes for co-sponsoring this event with us, and I think it's going to be a memorable afternoon. And I thank you all for coming. I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Dr. Rebecca Deen, who is an associate professor. She's chair of the Political Science Department and has expertise in the U.S. presidency. Dr. Deen?
Well, on behalf of the Department of Political Science, I'm pleased to be here and pleased to moderate this event. Thank you all for coming. There's a few seats up here in the front if you're still looking for someplace to sit. What I'd like to do is just introduce the panelists in turn, and then I'm going to ask them to share their thoughts and their remembrances and their perspectives on this event that we are discussing here today. And then after they're through, I'll open up the floor for questions and answers. So I'll introduce them each, and then I'll ask them to speak in turn. In 1963, Mr. Shoellkopf, Mr. John Shoellkopf, was a Dallas Times-Herald reporter, recently assigned to the city desk after 2 years of reporting at the Dallas County Courthouse. He covered events at both the School Book Depository and the Texas Theater on that fateful day. Because of the Texas connection, he was also sent in early January to Washington, D.C. for 2 years to cover then President Johnson. During that time, he covered the Warren Commission in its entirety. He was also the only news person in the Times-Herald that Sunday morning when Oswald was killed. In 1953, Mr. Paul McCaghren, a native of Ferris, Texas, joined the Dallas Police Department after serving honorably as a United States Marine on active duty in Korea, earning a Purple Heart and a Presidential Unit Citation Medal, among other honors. During his time with the Dallas Police, he ascended to the rank of Assistant Chief, where he was instrumental in establishing intelligence cooperatives with local law enforcement agencies across the South, focusing on fighting organized crime. It was in that capacity that he participated in the investigation into the Lee Harvey Oswald shooting in the basement of the Dallas City Hall. He retired from DPD in 1974, opening a security company, which is still in existence. Dr. Allan Saxe. Tell anyone you work at UT Arlington, especially if you say that you are a political scientist, and the first question they will ask you is, do you know Allan Saxe? Allan first arrived to what was then Arlington State College in 1965 as an assistant professor. A native Oklahoman, he earned his doctorate from the University of Oklahoma in 1969. While he is an expert on Texas politics, and especially the local politics of DFW, Allan is probably best known for his philanthropy. He has given away well over $1 million, a function of a small inheritance and his modest salary as a professor. Countless organizations, too many to name here, have benefited from his generosity. While these facts are known to his colleagues, what I was fascinated to learn is that he was good friends with Henry Zapruder, the son of the person who shot the famous Zapruder film of the assassination. So with that said, let's welcome our panelists. And Mr. Shoellkopf, if we could begin with you, please.
I didn't know you were an ex-Marine, for God's sake.
Told everybody that.
I told the Marine in Kuwait, I said, you're an ex-Marine? He said, Sonny, let me straighten you out. They said, there are no ex-Marines, they're all former Marines.
True.
I'd like to start off today with two contentions, which, to make a bad pun, may be contentious for some of you all today. Number one, I contend that despite the typhoon of recent media coverage about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, despite the endless what-ifs if Kennedy had lived, and most especially despite the cacophony of competing conspiracy theories, I contend there has been no new substantive facts about the assassination that we have not known about for many years. Number two, and far more important, I contend that that over the last 50 years, not one scintilla of evidence has come forward that has surfaced that contradicts the two main conclusions of the Warren Commission. Those conclusions, of course, were that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, murdered President Kennedy and Officer Tippit, and that 2 days later, Jack Ruby murdered Oswald on national television. I don't doubt that many of us here today have gained new information and insights about the Kennedy assassination during the past weeks of coverage. I know that I certainly have. What I doubt is that the facts necessary for perspective have been or hidden or were purposefully distorted in many, many years. In my own case, the two scenarios that I better understand today are hardly new or unique. Folks smarter than I might have recognized and accepted these realities from day one. Number one, I am dumbfounded and horrified that 62% of Americans tell the pollsters they believe Kennedy was killed by conspirators. To my mind, much of this conspiracy lunacy got started at the Dealey Plaza, where I was a few minutes after Kennedy was killed. I talked to a great many people that were standing only a few feet from the car as it came by, and I said, okay, what'd you see? And they say, okay, I'm Joe Blow, I live at so-and-so, my phone number is this, here's my wife and kids, and here's what I saw. I saw the first shots hit Jackie Kennedy. She fell down. I heard 12 shots. I saw the FBI running across the grassy knoll, and by the way, a person standing next to me was also hit by one of the shots. And I went and talked over and over again to other people, and they all had eyewitness accounts that were just absolutely absurd, and yet they weren't lying. The enormity of watching the President of the United States killed before their eyes was just a horrifying experience, and their eyewitness accounts were almost without exception bizarre. And I think that's where a lot of because a lot of those accounts appear in the early conspiracy books that say, oh, it didn't happen that way. To my mind, much of this, for some of these conspiracy people, what's weird to me is they can't seem to, they're not disturbed by the enormous list of possible villains. Was it the Mafia, the John Birch Society, the Texas Oil guys, Hoover's FBI, the CIA, Lyndon Johnson, Fidel Castro, and of course the Russians, where Oswald lived for a brief time and got himself a Russian wife. It's just crazy. Let me give you an example. My son-in-law called me here not too long ago, and he said, hey, I'm kind of disturbed. There's a blog on the internet about my grandfather. My son-in-law's name is Sam Bloom, and his grandfather was Sam Bloom, who was a very leading advertising executive in Dallas, and was called upon by the business community to help the Kennedy people in working out the arrangements for the visit. Sam played a role. The blog, though, claims that he headed a Jewish cabal that rerouted the original route of the Kennedy, so it went by the Texas School Book Depository, so Oswald could kill him. Well, it's just absolutely nuts. But that's the kind of thing that apparently 62% of the American people believe. It's just, it's terrible. My other insight, which I might make you wonder if I live in a tree, is that John Kennedy was a magical superstar. As a politician, a war hero, a book writer, a family man. To watch the tapes of his life that I have on television recently, it's just incredible. His beautiful wife and children, his smile, his wit, his elegance, his eloquence is to believe in Camelot and ignore any blemishes that might appear on his escutcheon. Why, as a young man, and as a newspaper reporter and Washington correspondent, I didn't fully appreciate the Kennedy magic mystifies me. Maybe I bought into the journalistic code of being cynical, I don't know. What I know now is that millions of Americans who were born, who were young when President Kennedy was killed, or who were even born afterwards, want the legend, if only Kennedy had lived. The qualified judgments of historians to us plays to a much smaller crowd. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCaghren?
Oh, that's me. I didn't know you were that smart. I've never heard you talk that long.
You were always doing the talking.
What I am about to talk to you about very briefly, keep in mind there were several crime scenes where the president was assassinated. Minutes later, where the police officer was shot and killed, 46 minutes later. Recall the crime scene when they went to the Texas Theater. Most of all, and what hurt the police department the most was when Lee Harvey Oswald was assassinated right in front of our eyes in the basement of City Hall. That is hard for us to explain. Now the country, let's talk about conspiracy just 1.5 seconds. These conspiracies will always be with us. Always. Because what happened there, if you look at it, the complex number of things, and people examine those things and said, that couldn't have happened. That could not have happened that way. For instance, when Ruby walked from the Western Union office into the basement of City Hall, a matter of seconds, then the shooting would not have occurred. And then you have to look at the fact that the person that wanted to kill the president, they ran the caravan of cars with the president in it right in front of the bookstore where he was working. We'll discuss that very briefly. This is what I want you to talk to you about. Investigation of the operational security involved in the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald. We could talk about the others for hours and hours and hours, and it won't change your mind. It will not change your mind. You'll still leave here in a state of confusion. But this report here, when I return, here's what you have. Now, if you want a copy of this, leave your card. Okay. With your email, give it to him. They'll send you a copy of it. It's about a 20-page report. It's all about the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald, or the aborted. We'll go through it. Lieutenant Jack Rebel and Paul McCaghren interviewed this person, and what we did. Let me go back and say, after the shooting of the president, there was over 100 people, 100 police officers in the Trade Mart. I was one of them. I was in command of the 3rd floor. It's a rotunda type operation. Here's where we bogged down. and this was our fault. We had all these officers. I could not get permission from anyone to disperse these officers to assist in the search for the killer of the president. You follow me? So far, I know I'm confusing, but I could not get permission to release all these officers to help in the search. The shooting occurred at 12:32. I'm sitting down there with well over 100 officers. They had captains, assistant chiefs, and so forth and so on. I went to the chief officer that was in charge, and I said, "We need to disperse now, sir." And his words were, "Well, no, because our general order says stay here till the president arrives." I said, "Sir, I talked to one of the motorcycle officers who was right by the president when he was killed, when he was shot, and he said it was a fatal head wound." He said, "Our general order says to stay here until the president arrives." What do you do? Anyway, at 12, let me think. Tippit was shot at 1:15. Yes, 1:15. Tippit was shot, they come out and officer down. They didn't know that the killer of the president had shot the officer. But they still would not release us for another 10 minutes. When they did release us, then we dispersed. We could have already done this, it had been a great assistance. But it shows you how a police agency can get bogged down in a serious situation like this. When we finally got back to the city hall, you could not believe the turmoil going on. You couldn't. I don't know where those people came from. I don't know where those reporters are strange people. I don't know where they're parachuted in or what. But we couldn't get into our own offices. You see, we're still trying to run a police agency. Things are still going on. I guess they came with the president when he came down. Well, you got light up one of those nasty
I'm gonna chew it. The doctor and my wife won't let me smoke anymore.
I told you I was gonna put you in jail the next time you do that. All right, we finally got in, and I'm getting to my office. My office is right across the hall from Captain Fritz. We both got glass windows there, and they started piling into Fritz's office, and finally the prisoner showed up, and then the reporters absolutely went berserk. One of them got in my office while I was out. He got into my office. Of course, keep in mind this was the moment of all moments for reporters. And he locked my door. I could see on the inside of the window. He locked my door. It wasn't funny, John. He locked my door. He's sitting there, and I believe he had a cigar, but nevertheless, he goes to the city hall operator to place a call to New York on my phone. And he's talking, and I'm beating on the glass. He said, "Open the door." It's just doing that. So the door got open with my foot. And he said, You can't put me in jail for that. I said, "No, I can do you something better." I took him back to the interrogation room. I put him on the inside. The first thing that happened to him, he fell off the interrogation stool. Then I locked the door from the outside. I told the desk man, I said, "Hold this person in here till I get back." Nevertheless, everything was just absolute. You couldn't believe it. And we tried to control them. We pushed them outside. We had armed police officers up there, and you couldn't do it. One of the things we couldn't control was staff officers. They would go to the staff officers down at the end of the hall and plead with them to let these people in. Make a long story short, we finally proceeded with what we had to do. Lee Harvey Oswald was brought up to Captain Fritz's office. are the most terrible circumstances that you could believe. There were FBI people there, Secret Service, probably some park officers, I'm not sure. And they were all crowding in and wanting to ask questions, because this is their big day. We finally made it through Saturday. Now, I don't know why Ruby didn't shoot him there in the hallway. He had plenty of opportunity. Ruby was there. Let me explain something very briefly if I can. Ruby owned a bar in Dallas that was frequented by a lot of off-duty police officers and newsmen. And the newspaper said they went there for free coffee. No, they didn't. Out-of-town officers would come to town, and the gracious city of Dallas would give each officer $5 to entertain out-of-town officers. I know this is 63, but $5 wouldn't go anywhere. And of course, they come out of town so they could go down to whatever. I didn't go there myself. They expected to be entertained. Everybody knew Ruby. He was known as just a big buffoon. He liked to be the center of attention. He was a showman from beginning to end. And he had a press pass. Everybody knew him. I don't think anyone intentionally let him in. But after the shooting occurred, they were taking Oswald out, all the stories in the papers, so forth, so on. He was assassinated right there in front of us. Yes, we had guards stationed all around the entrances and so forth and so on. And the crazy part about it, when they jumped on Oswald and he was on the ground, one of the newsmen had his mic over here like that, and you could hear Ruby say, "Hey guys, it's me, you know me, I'm old Jack." He acted as if they were going to lift him up and dust off his clothes and say, "Jack, you shouldn't do things like that." But nevertheless, we put him in jail. Here's where the fan hit the sand. Everyone was saying a Dallas police officer probably led him into the basement of City Hall. We didn't believe it, but we had to check it out. In a period of time, it'll indicate here the number of people that we talked to, 132, including newsmen. And we measured it. Okay, let me get the story straight real fast, Slide. He sent a telegram, a moneygram, at the Western Union, I didn't make her mad. Western Union office, and it's stamped at 116. Okay, it's 442 feet from the Western Union office down where you turn and walk down the pathway, the driveway, to where Oswald was coming out. If there had been seconds difference, Oswald would have made it into the car. But here's what we know happened. Everyone said that someone let him in. Take the time it was stamped, he passed the camera going down the walkway. Then he told the arresting officers, he said, "Well, I saw real Sam Pierce, Lieutenant Pierce, driving a squad car out up the ramp." Real Sam Pierce, he couldn't have made that up. Real Sam Pierce was driving the squad car up. He told the officers, in res gestae statements, he said, "I did it, I know you guys couldn't do it yourself, so I did it myself." Who's in charge of Secret Service then? You remember that?
Nationally?
Huh?
Nationally?
No, locally. You knew him.
Soros?
Forrest Earl, thank you. Who said that? Don't take his Forrest Earl heard it. Everything was very definite. that no police officer was involved in that. We were all accused. Now, let me tell you one thing about you, and then I'll sit down. A lot of things, a lot of people failed that day, leading up that day. No, I'm not throwing rocks at the FBI. No. But the FBI knew in 1959 that Lee Harvey Oswald defected to Russia. When he got to the embassy in Moscow, he publicly denounced the United States and said he would do any harm he possibly could to the people of the United States, to America. They monitored him through naval intelligence in Russia. Now, I don't know how that works, but apparently they have some apparatus. Anyway, they knew when he was getting ready to come back to America. And guess what? He didn't have any money, so the State Department gave him $450 to come back to the United States. He never did pay it back. They gave him $450 to bring he and his family back. First went to Fort Worth. The FBI interviewed him there. One of the agents wrote in his reports he had an antagonistic manner towards the FBI. All right, they pulled off of that. Later on, they heard he went to New Orleans because people were parading around saying free Cuba, play fair with Cuba, and so forth. He got in a fight. They put him in jail. FBI interviewed him there. Well, it's a federal law. You're not supposed to lie to a federal agent. He gave them bogus information about his family. He lied to them. They found out about it the next day. They took no action whatsoever. The next thing I heard is when he was in, I'm trying to think, okay, from there he went to Mexico City. They monitored him in there. Of course, you know the Secret Service had a surveillance going on in all the embassies. And they spotted him there, and they sent his description to Dallas FBI, and they identified him as Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, they left him alone. He visited the Russian embassy in Moscow, in Mexico City. He comes back to the United States, and they wait a week, for some reason or another, to go and talk to him. And all kinds of things happen. All right, the FBI knew the president was coming to Dallas, like we all did. We were all notified on November the 14th. Gordon Shanklin, who was the head of the FBI in Dallas, had a meeting with all his agents and said, the president's coming to Dallas. Does anyone know anyone that could do harm to the president? Hosty, the agent that was assigned to this man, Lee Harvey Oswald, knew who he was, and he had been told by the landlady that he was working at the Texas School Book Depository. As such, Hosty waited a week, called down there and verified that he was working there. Later on, the head of the FBI was asked by Hugh Ainsworth, why didn't you people take some action in guarding him from hurting the president? Well, you knew that the whole caravan was going by Texas School Book Depository. Gordon Shanklin's reply was, we didn't want him to lose his job. Anyway, those things happen. What have I left out?
Covered it.
You're supposed to be the one that prompts me. That's what happened. Who's to blame? We're all to blame. Complacency. Who would assassinate the President of the United States in Dallas, Texas? No. Yeah, we couldn't even think of such a wild thing. Nevertheless, come on down to Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was assassinated right in front of us, and that killed us. That brought us to our knees. I mean, we had officers crying over that situation. But we picked up, we carried on. Not very well, but we carried on. Thank you for coming. Should we take mug shots of everybody? Let me show you one thing that could have changed history. Now, I was given, I got 2 minutes. We had a 5-man investigative team that I was on. We gathered up all the material that we could find regarding the assassination. This was all given to the chief of police. The chief of police got crossways with the FBI. Okay? It was partially our fault because he was, every time the head of the FBI called him, he'd have a press statement, press release. He was trying to be kind to the press. I understand that. But he had a whole box of material. When he left, Chief Batchelor took over. By that time, I had been made Director of Intelligence. And don't make any smart remarks about it.
Let's see.
Yeah, you were. Anyway, I was made head of the Intelligence Division. Batchelor called me over to his office and he said, "We found a locked cabinet outside the chief's office. We finally got a locksmith to get it open. A whole box of media papers. I don't know whether they were sent to the Warren Commission or not. I took charge of them. He said, you take these and hold on to them because there will be another investigation sooner or later." When I left in '74, I took them with me. I put them in a place, nobody dared touch them. I put them in my wife's walk-in bedroom closet. Nobody goes in there. Anyway, in '78, they had the House Assassination Committee. I was subpoenaed to give all those files. 2 of the things in there that were the most important, and that was 2 dicta belts. They had been looking for those for years. Quite frankly, I didn't know that they were looking for them. Some other agency was. And that supposedly they found, after they played those tapes, supposedly they found a 4th shot in one of the tapes. Let me tell you right now, they didn't do it. They didn't. I talked to one of the investigators. I said, "I don't believe that theory about the 4th shot." He said, "Listen, let me tell you something. They had to do something because they spent $25 million on this investigation. So call it mess shot or whatever. But nevertheless, this was the end of the end. I never did get on. They promised me, they sent me a letter saying they'd send all the tapes back. So everything I could give back to the police department that I stolen, that I had in my possession. Let me show you. This has been copied 1,000,000 times. But this person right here, I know you can't see his name is Blackie Harrison. He's putting a cigar in his mouth. Blackie hadn't taken time to put a cigar in his mouth when he saw Jack Ruby walk by. History would have been changed. That's crazy, I know. But Blackie took time to put the cigar in his mouth, and when he did, he barely missed Jack Ruby. So that's what happens to people who smoke cigars. Thank you, I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mr. McCaghren. Dr. Saxe.
Part of it was true.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a photo, I don't think you'll see it, maybe you've seen it in the Star Telegram recently. This is a photo of President Kennedy in Fort Worth, Texas, the morning of the terrible assassination. And I mention this because, I don't know if you can see this gentleman there, he became the Dean of Business here at UT Arlington. His name was Larry Nelson. At that time, he was not the Dean of Business, but I knew him well. I think his son was in my class, so my little touch of history. And I think that all the presentations really show and there's some historians in the room, probably they would second the motion, that history is really very chaotic. There isn't anything planned to it. It's so chaotic that it couldn't be chaotic. You want to look back and try to figure out there must be something to it, you know. But I think that the gentleman that preceded me showed that history really is chaotic. A cigar could have changed the face of history in many, many ways. You get into an automobile accident, 1 inch, and you're alive, and the next minute, God forbid, something happens to you. And that, I think, is what happened with the Kennedy assassination. There's lots of interesting things to say about it. One of my friends at the University of Oklahoma was a man by the name of Henry Zapruder. And his father was Abe Zapruder, who took that very famous film of the Kennedy assassination. And by the way, when I first came to UT Arlington, 2 years after the assassination, there was a woman who taught at SMU. She's now deceased. And she invited me over to her house to see a film. And I said, what is this film? And I don't know why she brought me out. I don't know. I was known as sort of a rabble-rouser or who knows what. The minute I hit town, I was starting up stuff. And so I went over to her house here in Arlington. And she showed the Zapruder film. But she had a gentleman there from the Midlothian Mirror newspaper. I don't even know if it exists anymore. Anybody from Midlothian? Are you from Midlothian or something? Are you from Midlothian? And I forgot the name of the editor from the Midlothian Mirror.
Penn Jones.
Penn Jones, that's right, Penn Jones. And he was a small man, if I remember correctly, and he was a conspiratorialist. And he stuck on this. He used the Zapruder film and other films, I believe, to show there was a conspiracy. And it was a dark Friday night, cold and rainy, as apparently this Friday night's going to be. And I'm there watching the film, and I didn't know what's going on. I'm just a young kid coming here, you know, from OU. And in somebody's home, I was nice enough to be invited to their home on Friday night. And Penn Jones pointed out, if you've seen this, there's somebody on the route pumping an umbrella. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not in the old group. And he said, that's it. That's the signal. He's coming around the bend. You know, he's pumping the umbrella. Anyway, there was stuff like that whole night. I left that night saying, my gosh, where am I? You know what I mean? I'm afraid. What is this place? You know, what have I gotten myself into? And so that was my introduction. By the way, I had Penn Jones come to my class because I love to stir things up a little bit. So I had Penn Jones come to my class and show the film. And the class was packed. You know, the first time it had been just packed to the rafters. And showing that film, he shows the umbrella being pumped, and he looks along the roadway, and he points out various other things that led to the conspiracy. And it is unfortunate that a huge number of people in the United States believe in the conspiracy theory. I've heard as high as 9 out of 10, not just 60, but that 9 out of 10 people believe there's some kind of a conspiracy. I guess it depends on how you ask the question. Anyway, I called Henry Zapruder. I knew him before the assassination. He left the University of Oklahoma and went to Harvard Law School, way out of my reach. But after the assassination, I called him up and said, was that your father? He said, yes, it was. He said, you know, everything is coming down, you know, and all this kind of stuff. It became very tumultuous. And I said, well, what does your father think? He said, I don't know any more than you do about what's going on. And that's true. Mr. Zapruder, by the way, was a very, very kind man. I met him one time in Dallas. His name was Abraham Zapruder, and he had a little bit of an accent. He was a very kind man, loved politics, loved America, tried to make a living, but I think his business was right across the street from the depository, and he was there with this 8mm camera, and taking photos. And I think he had a secretary with him who was sort of propping him up. And that's a normal thing to happen, you know. But he became part of history. And by the way, he sold, I think, one of the initial films or a copy of it to Look magazine or Life magazine. And part of the proceeds he gave to Officer Tippett's widow, which is interesting. And it was about half of it he gave to Officer Tippett's widow. And a lot of people don't know that happened. Anyway, both of the Zapruders, Abe Zapruder died. I did not know him that well, met him once. And Henry Zapruder, my friend, died several years ago in Washington, D.C. He was a very prominent lawyer, and especially became very well known as an advocate for indigents in the courtroom. And he became, and that was his deal, and became very well known because of that. Why did President Kennedy even come to Dallas in the first place? He came to Dallas because the Democratic Party was split between a liberal group and a conservative group, and it was deep. If you think the Republicans are split today, the Democratic Party was split much more at that time. And President Kennedy was facing a re-election in 1964, and he had to unite the Democratic Party. He needed the South. He needed the South, as everybody knows, and that's why he picked Lyndon Johnson as his running mate. Without Lyndon Johnson, President Kennedy would not have been elected by all accounts. But he's up for re-election, and by some accounts, he was about to remove Lyndon Johnson as vice president and maybe bring on somebody else. That's pure hearsay, but there's some talk about that. So he comes to Dallas not only to raise money at Market Hall, where he was going to make a speech, but to try to unite the Democratic Party. And he had been, I think, in other cities throughout Texas before he came to Dallas. And what is interesting about it is that apparently the depth of dislike between the liberals and the conservatives was so deep, and maybe the other gentleman can add more to it, that Ralph Yarborough was the head of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party in the state, and John Connally, who at that time was governor, was the head of the conservative wing. They disliked each other so much they would not even get in the same car with each other. So there is history again, how history can turn in a couple of minutes. It was a rainy morning, and then the sun came out later on. If it had continued to rain, most likely there would have been a top. You see how chaos causes things more than almost anything else. But President Kennedy came here to unite the Democratic Party for his re-election, which was not necessarily all assured in 1964. By the way, Arlington plays a sort of a marginal role in this. There were some police officers in Arlington, as I understand it, that actually helped to guard Marina Oswald. Marina was the wife, is that right? Marina was the wife. And they brought her into a motel, which has now been demolished, called the Six Flags Inn, which was between Grand Prairie and Arlington. And this police officer told me that he helped to guard, along with some other police officers, Marina Oswald as they whisked her away for her own safety and kept her in the Inn of the Six Flags in Arlington, between Arlington and Grand Prairie, and that has pretty well been demolished at this time. Marguerite Oswald, the mother, wasn't Marguerite the mother? Marguerite Oswald was a housekeeper and sort of a babysitter, if you want to call it that, for a very prominent Arlington family many years previous to that. And I asked the people in that family if they remember Marguerite. They said, oh, we remember it. And we always ask, how was Lee Harvey doing? You know what I mean? Who was a little bitty kid at that time. At the University of Oklahoma, I was there in November of '63 when the news came of the assassination. And all my friends in the basement of the library at the University of Oklahoma, I studied in the basement of the law library. And when the news came out, immediately they came to a conclusion. It had to be a right-winger who killed the president. And Dallas was known as a very strong place for extreme right and everything else, you know, like any other city in America. But that was a reputation. Lee Harvey Oswald, by the way, had shot earlier at the home of General Edwin Walker in Dallas on Turtle Creek Avenue, if you know where that is, and didn't strike anything, but he hated Edwin Walker as well. Lee Harvey Oswald was anything but a right-winger. He was a communist, probably, by all accounts, and also had spent some time in the Soviet Union and was a great proponent of Castro's Cuba. And if you want a reason why, probably Lee Harvey Oswald looked at President Kennedy. Remember, this is after the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And Kennedy had this, he did not like Castro's Cuba, if you look at a little bit of history, the Bay of Pigs and so forth. And so he's after Kennedy. It does make sense if you feel it that way. But Lee Harvey Oswald had no light for the United States, as other gentlemen have talked about earlier. He had been in the Soviet Union. He disliked President Kennedy. He was a great aficionado of Castro's Cuba. So there you have it. History, I don't think, is that difficult sometimes to unravel. But I still remember that umbrella being pumped. And I remember what Penn Jones said. It was in a sunny day. So what's he doing with an umbrella pumping up and down? And by the way, I carry an umbrella on sunny days too. I'm a sissy and I carry umbrellas on sunny days just in case. But it's interesting how Arlington has a touch with history in retrospect, and I did too, you know, through the Zapruder family. And I appreciate this very much.
Thank you to all our panelists. We have time for questions and answers, so if you have some questions, just raise your hand to be recognized. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I don't know if any of the gentlemen can answer this or not, and I haven't really seen it addressed in anything that we watched recently or anything. But Jack Ruby went to trial. That's correct, right?
Yes.
And he was found guilty.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Overturned
Okay. And
later.
then I heard that it was overturned, and he was in prison waiting for it to be appealed. I was wondering what would cause that to be overturned. What grounds did that get overturned?
I'm not sure of the precise thing. I think that the judge didn't allow some testimony about Ruby's mental condition that the appellate court then disagreed with and so on. So they said have a new trial. Of course, the district attorney at that time, a guy named Henry Wade, he said, of course we'll try him again. So it was not a vindication of Ruby's innocence in any way. It had to do with the legal testimony, I believe.
It was such an important trial. I was just, kind of surprised that it would be overturned like that,
Well, in the heat of the battle after the assassination, there were some mistakes made by the district attorney's office about some testimony and various things like that, and it all kind of played out in the trial. And the judge, who was, part and parcel of the courthouse crowd, made rulings that were certainly thought well of by the district attorney's office, and the court said, that shouldn't have been allowed, and let's do it again. So that's what happened.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Two statements. There's a book here in your library. I can't remember the author's name, but he was the first black Secret Service officer to serve on the White House detail. He was selected in John Canyon. In his book, he says they were not trying to protect him that day. Second statement, I had a neighbor who was working in a second floor office building over Main Street. He saw the motorcade go by. It went by a city bus with the windows down. Someone with a pistol could reach outside the bus and shot him. No one came to his office that day to check, like the Secret Service was supposed to check, where the parade was going to go, see if it was safe. No one came to his office and made any questions who was working there. So he said they weren't trying to protect the president either.
Any of you that have watched an American political campaign must know that it is impossible to protect the President of the United States if somebody wants to kill him and doesn't mind being caught. Just watch pictures of Obama or Kennedy or any of the people that have run for office walking into the crowd, shaking hands, kissing babies, doing all the things, attending all sorts of political rallies and so on like that. It's frankly just quite impossible if you want to, if you're willing to do that sort of thing and get caught, you can't protect the man. And unless something radically changes, that's just the case. I don't happen to believe that the Secret Service, as you suggest, didn't want to protect him. I don't think that's true at all. But there's lots of things that people disagree about.
Yes, standing at the end.
If Oswald was the assassin, why did he claim that he was innocent when he told the police I'm a patsy? When he told that to reporters?
The question was, if he was guilty, why did he say that he was innocent?
They all do. You can probably ask any police officer or a warden at a penitentiary, and they say the one common thing is, of all the inmates, we didn't do it. So I think it's probably nothing more than that, you know. Although, I have a little bit more statement about it.
There was another question over here. Yes, sir.
So you had said that you were subpoenaed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, right? The gentleman on the
Yes.
right? Okay. Essentially, I believe the chief investigator's name was G. Robert Blakey. They
Yes.
concluded that the president was most likely killed as a result of the conspiracy. Do you find their finding? Do you think that their findings were incorrect, or did the evidence that you provided to them add anything, or was it just based on the? I think you mentioned addictive health or something.
I don't know how to answer your question. I don't believe their conclusion. I'm not in a position to say yes or no, but everything we've seen so far indicates there was no conspiracy.
Okay.
But they had to come out with something,
After spending all that money, you said.
so that's it.
I think the committee left it open. I don't think they said there was a conspiracy. They left it open for further.
They based all their findings on the Dickie belt. They said they heard the shot on the Dickie belt.
Someone who hasn't had a chance. Ma'am?
I don't know enough about it, but how did they determine that it was Lee Harvey Oswald in the first place? I mean, how did they even know where to look and find him and all of that?
They, shortly after the assassination, they did an inventory of all the employees. They figured out where the shots came from, and they did an inventory of the employees at the Texas School Book Depository, and he was absent. And so they immediately started looking for Oswald. And everybody's talked about these little funny quirks of history if it hadn't happened. Well, after Oswald killed Tippit, he was out running, and he took his jacket off, and he was walking, and he came by a bookstore on Jefferson Avenue. This is one of my little scoops when I was reporting on this thing. I was at the school book deposit, at the Texas Theater when they drug him out there. And he went in this bookstore, and the police by then knew that Tippit was killed. So they were running all over Jefferson and all of that area, because that's nearby to where Tippit was killed. And they were looking for somebody, and they had a description of what he looked like. People had seen him shoot Oswald. So he went into this shoe store, and it was an old-timey shoe store with glass windows that focused down to a door. And so when a police car went by, the guy that was in front of this store crouched kind of down and kind of semi-hid. And so the shoe salesman in there, I think I've got his name here in the book, I talked to him, Carver I think it was, he thought that was kind of unusual, because when the car went by, the man then left in front of the shoe store, and he walked out to the street, and he saw the guy duck into this theater, which was about 50 or 75 yards down from the shoe store. So they walked down to the theater and said to the ticket teller, well, did you see that guy come in? And the ticket said, no, I didn't see anybody come in. And they said, well, we saw him go in, and they were listening to the radio, and they knew that people were looking for the murderer of this police officer. And so they called the police, and they came looking for the guy that they thought probably killed Tippit was in the theater, and that's kind of how they got it. And then when they did that, then they quickly discovered that this is Lee Harvey Oswald, who they're looking for as being missing from the Texas School Books Depository. So if those people hadn't have seen that man crouch down in front of the school book depository, would they have caught Oswald that quickly? Who knows?
We have time for one more question. Okay, yes, sir.
For the Dallas police officer, I was just curious. I heard that Lee Harvey Oswald was going to be transported like at midnight. with no photographers around and all that for security reasons. And that's what the chief or some high-ranking police officer wanted. But somebody overturned him and decided to move him the next day and to publicize when they were planning on moving him.
I think that's right.
Who made that decision to overturn the?
Jesse Curry, the chief of police, did.
Yes, but he was told to do that from the city manager. They wanted to show the public that we caught this guy. He wasn't beat up, tortured, or so forth and so on. And they decided to bring him out in the public area, which is the most horrible thing they could possibly do. But we had all those officers dead, man, so everybody thought. They even backed up an armored car ahead of the ramp, and they couldn't get the armored car down there. And so that was dismissed, but they were they felt comfortable with all the police officers. The most logical thing they could have possibly done was transport him at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. The most logical thing was one of our officers gave his life capturing this person. And yes, they want to show him off that we've caught him, here he is. It all backfired on us. What we can't explain, well, Curry told everybody it's going to be, that we're going to transfer him at 10 o'clock. Well, it didn't happen at 10 o'clock, I think it happened at 10:35. But what you can't explain to people, and sometimes I don't understand. Here, Ruby is down here, as far as we know, with no plans to go in the basement and shoot him because he didn't know what time he was coming out. Here he is, he walks 140 steps to the entrance, chance. Then he goes 90 feet down the ramp, chance. He's there a minute and a half by these officers, and here comes Lee Harvey Oswald. Chance. So, try to explain that to people, it's hard to explain. I have a French word, the hell with it, they don't believe it. Now, I've got in many a fight over this thing, really. I got, in Atlanta, Georgia, a conference. And they started questioning me about this thing. How could we have possibly let this go? It wouldn't stop. I tried to explain everything I possibly could. So I said, I'm up to stay roster. I said, okay, everyone here that thinks the Dallas Police Department with negligent, extremely negligent. Everyone here form a solid line over here on the right-hand side. And you can come up here, I'll be gentle here. And you can kiss my royal backside. I use that generic term, I know, but nobody came up.
Let me make one comment.
Oh,
For
Lord.
you all that will continue to be interested in this gripping subject. I'm going to tell you, there's no better account of it than the Warren Commission report, which you can buy, and it goes into vast detail on all of the aspects of these kind of things. And if you're serious about knowing what happened and you're serious about reading it, you ought to read it. And then
It is good.
Then read some of that crap that's in some of these conspiracy books, and you'll say, how do people believe that kind of stuff? But they do.
Abraham Lincoln was a conspiracy, but, I mean, his assassination. But John Kennedy, President Kennedy, likely not. John Kennedy was a flawed man in his private life, but in his public life, he was inspirational. And that's probably true of a lot of great people. They have two different kind of lives, as everybody knows. By the way, the police officer in Arlington that protected the Oswald family, his name was Bob Parsons. He's now deceased. He also became a police officer in Withington Gardens after his retirement. And as most of you know, Lee Harvey Oswald is buried about 2 miles west of here, in Rosewood Cemetery, in a very small, unmarked grave.
Okay, you two guys got to say something, so I get to say something. Okay? Then we'll stop. Go on. 2 minutes. Talk about the Zapruder, how he had an office close by there. Well, it was for putting together my mother-in-law, who would not know how to lie, cheat, or steal, so help me. She was working over there as a seamstress. She's up on the second or third floor. Anyway, she had invited us over for dinner about 2 weeks after that, and I was down. I'm talking about down, down, down. I was trying to put all this together from the 5 investigators, and I'm down because we're not making very good progress. And I'm sitting there, and she's serving us, she's the kind that she serves each one. And she said, we're looking out the window, and I forgot that she was working in. She said, we're looking at the window, and Thelma next to me said, Sadie, look over there, somebody just stuck a broomstick out that window. And this is true. On the 6th floor. And she said, right after that, the president's motorcade came by, and we heard these popping noises. And I said, if one other person tells me that they were in Dealey Plaza when this occurred, I'm going to hit him in the mouth. But I'm telling you, my own mother-in-law hears this. And I said, Ms. Brown, please, please, don't ever repeat that story. I'm serious. Don't repeat it again to anyone. She said, well, I won't. She said, we heard the popping noise, and then this broomstick disappeared. Well, she saw, this woman actually saw what happened. But as far as people being in Dealey Plaza, everywhere I go, I'm pulled over the side and said, my cousin Ralph is in Dealey Plaza. If there are as many people in Dealey Plaza that pull me, there would be 500,000 people. Everybody saw something. And a Dallas police officer I've known all these years took me aside at a police retirees lunch the other day, and he said, Paul, I know you were on that investigation page. You know, I've got some good information. Why? Why wait now? A police sergeant came up to me this year and said, you know, I've never told you this. Oh, me, no. He said, well, I had parked my squad car right across the street from the entrance to the basement of the city hall. And he said, I know Jack Ruby. And he said, I don't believe I saw him go down there. I said, don't tell me that again, please. But people still believe those things. You believe all the conspiracies you want. I am not going to change your mind. No one will change your mind. I believe conspiracies come about because this is my Dr. McCagren's theory. It comes about because of a basic distrust in government. And it's not going to change. Go on and believe it. I'm not going to ridicule it. I'm not going to take your fingerprints and photograph it. It's good. Just keep talking about it.
By the way, I have some good information.
Well, thank you to John Shoellkopf, to Dr. Allan Saxe, and to Paul McCaghren, and for your memories and your time this afternoon. And thank you to Rebecca Deen for moderating this panel discussion. As just a word of advertisement, Special Collections, in addition to the 3,000 images in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram coverage of the Fort Worth visit and some part of the Dallas visit of President Kennedy, we do have the A.C. Green papers, and A.C. Green was the editor of the editorial page at the Dallas Times-Herald. And included in that are letters to the editor that he received. And so there's quite a number from all over the world, and it kind of gives you a really good insight into how people were reacting. And we also have a very large Jack White collection. Jack White was one of those conspiracy theorists, but he has a large collection of the Pin Jones newsletters and a lot of publications of the day, and he corresponded with a lot of other conspiracy theorists. So that's just some of the collection materials and special collections that relate to the Kennedy assassination. So thank you for coming. We invite you to go to the reception out in the atrium, and to remind you again that our Howdy Mr. President exhibit is up through February the 8th, and we hope that you'll find time to see it. Thank you very much for coming.